He spent 10 years as the only crafter for the strongest knight order in the kingdom. They took the credit, he did the work, and when he finally said no, they called him a loser and threw him out. His name is Joshua. For a decade, he forged every weapon, repaired every shield, and maintained every piece of gear. The Schwartz Knights never lost a battle, and Joshua was the reason why. But the leader, his childhood friend Roy, took all the glory. Every victory speech, every medal, every noble handshake went to Roy. Joshua stood in the back of the forge, hands black with soot, and said nothing. Then Roy crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He started hunting innocent people and selling them as captives. When Joshua tried to stop him, Roy fired him on the spot, called him a useless loser who couldn't swing a sword. Joshua didn't argue, didn't beg. He picked up his small slime friend Whiz and walked out the door. 10 years of loyalty, erased in a single sentence. But what Roy didn't know, what nobody knew, was what Joshua could actually do. Production magic. The ability to create, reshape, and enchant any material with nothing but willpower and skill. Roy thought he was firing a blacksmith. He was releasing a one-man army. Heading south on his own, Joshua heard screaming from the road ahead. A group of hunters was attacking a girl. Her name was Ira, a Kijin, a race known for their powerful horn. The hunters had already cut her horn off to sell it on the black market. Joshua didn't hesitate. He used his production magic to disarm every hunter in seconds and took them all down. Then he healed Ira's wounds and agreed to help her get back to her people. When they reached her village, Joshua found a community on the edge of collapse. Weak stone tools, empty food stores, warriors with nothing to fight with. A girl named Met, one of the village's strongest fighters, begged him for help. Joshua decided to stay. He used his magic to craft powerful crossbows in minutes. Weapons the village had never seen before. He and Met went hunting to test them, and the results were devastating. Dangerous monsters that used to take entire squads fell to a few well-placed bolts. When a giant armor board charged out of the brush, Joshua created a steel sword on the spot. He finished the beast in a single strike. For the first time in years, the village had enough meat to celebrate. Back at the knight's castle, everything was falling apart without Joshua. Roy tried to hire new crafters, but none could keep up with Joshua's speed or quality. They quit one by one because the workload was impossible. The knight's gear became trash, money dried up, and Roy finally realized the truth. Joshua was the one holding everything together. But that realization came far too late. In the village, Joshua got to work on defense. Met showed him an old drawing of ancestral armor, small overlapping plates called lamellar. Joshua used armor boar scales and hell alligator hide to recreate it. He scanned Met's measurements with wind magic, which made her blush bright red. Then he activated production magic, and a complete set of enchanted armor appeared on her body. An old village elder began to cry. The armor looked exactly like the legendary gear his father wore over 100 years ago. Joshua crafted 5 more sets for the best warriors and forged iron daggers and spears. He spent the rest of the day training 5 more Kijin to use crossbows. That night, tension arrived before the enemy did. Ira and Met both entered Joshua's tent, blushing and arguing over who should take care of him. The awkward moment was cut short when both sensed heavy footsteps approaching the village. Over 20 people, almost certainly captive hunters. Ira prepared for battle, revealing she possessed the white Oni warrior crest. She handed Joshua her own severed horn and asked him to forge it into a weapon. Joshua absorbed the horn into his magical workshop and created a silver katana. He enchanted it with fire and wind magic so Ira could cast spells through the blade, even without being a mage herself. The Kijin warriors took positions behind the new wooden fence. Joshua used magic to kick up a massive dust storm that blinded the approaching hunters. Met and her team fired crossbows through the chaos, dropping several enemies instantly. But a massive man in heavy plate armor charged through the dust, unfazed by the arrows. Joshua recognized the crest on the armor. It was Goss, a brutal warrior from the Schwartz Knights, sent by Roy himself. Goss laughed and bragged about a girl he had recently killed during a captive hunt. Joshua attacked in disgust, but Goss blocked him with his heavy shield. Then Ira charged forward. Her new katana glowed with red-black flame as she swung once. The enchanted shield split in half and Goss fell before he hit the ground. The remaining hunters fled into the night. The next morning, Joshua burned the bodies and recovered the enemy gear. He mass-produced 50 more crossbows and 30 iron spears. Then he went into the forest and absorbed a massive iron oak tree. He used the wood to instantly build a 4-story watchtower in the center of the village. Meanwhile, Roy's life in the city was imploding. He had blown all the knight's gold on parties, not realizing Joshua managed the budget. Creditors stormed his mansion, accountants quit, and knights went unpaid. Roy ordered his men to find Joshua finally understanding who kept everything running. But Joshua was busy building something far bigger than Roy could imagine. A new group arrived from the north, werewolves led by a young girl named Milk. They were covered in blood and exhausted. Captive hunters had attacked their village, killing many and capturing the rest. Ira welcomed them despite the old rivalry between their races. Joshua healed their wounds and built 15 wooden houses for the newcomers. He reinforced the outer walls and decided the next step was finding metal. Ira told him about an abandoned mine nearby. Inside the mine, they hit the jackpot: iron, copper, and coal. A giant devil snake guarded the tunnels, but Ira took it down with one swift move. Then a swarm of friendly slimes appeared. Happy the snake was gone, they agreed to help carry heavy rocks and ore for the village. Joshua found a rare green mana stone inside the snake, perfect for healing magic. When they returned, Met was waiting at the entrance covered in blood and smiling. Captive hunters had attacked while they were away, and Met's team had handled them easily. Joshua rewarded the defenders with new equipment: black demon iron armor and a powerful katana for Met, a magic-resistant robe, and a healing staff for Milk. He mass-produced composite bows that were faster and stronger than anything the Kijin had used. Joshua knew the village needed a real stone wall to survive what was coming. At the quarry, a giant stone golem attacked them. It could regenerate its limbs, so Joshua absorbed its rocky body to expose the core. Ira sliced the core in half, and Joshua turned the pieces into 2 loyal worker golems. Roy's situation in the city reached rock bottom. Completely broke, his best warrior missing, debt collectors raiding his mansion. In a rage, he attacked his own accountant and ended the man's life on the spot. He crawled to a shady bank and begged for a loan with crippling interest. His expensive sword snapped in half, leaving him with nothing but failing pride. While Roy crumbled, Joshua's village thrived. His slime friend was organized the mine slimes to carry stones during the night. Joshua used the massive supply to build a tall stone watchtower in 10 minutes. Then a massive group of ants, giant tree people, charged toward the village in rage. Captive hunters had burned their forest and kidnapped their people. Joshua stopped them without violence, using a wall of fire to block their charge. Their leader Ecclesia surrendered and transformed into a woman with light green hair. Joshua offered an alliance, and 200 ants joined the village. He built a massive stone fortress wall on the north side and a giant catapult for the tower. The enemy fire mage Burnish arrived with 300 mercenaries. Joshua scattered explosive cold dust into the air and waited. When Burnish sparked his flame, the dust ignited and turned the mage into a walking torch. Joshua had pre-soaked the ground with oil, and the fire spread through the enemy ranks. The Kijin fired crossbows, the catapult launched boulders, and the ants ambushed survivors. The enemy army was completely wiped out. To rescue the kidnapped people, Joshua used a clever trick. He had the slimes, ants, and warriors hold thousands of torches in the dark. It looked like a massive army of 10,000 surrounding the captive hunter's castle. The terrified leader surrendered and released every single prisoner. Joshua freed everyone without losing a single life. After the rescue, Joshua was nominated as leader of the new Fendel Alliance. Despite being human in a community of demihumans, he accepted. He built 200 wooden houses and hours to accommodate the growing population. A herd of magic sheep called moops escaped from the Demon King's army and joined them. Joshua healed them and gave them a home in exchange for wool and milk. The Schwartz Knights sent 2,000 soldiers south to crush the village. Joshua used his flag trick again, making it look like 10,000 warriors hid in the trees. Roy's advisor Villian arrived and mocked Joshua, threatening to cut off his legs. Joshua challenged him to a duel and disarmed him with a single move. The Grank mercenaries arrived and the knights fled, abandoning Villian to his fate. Joshua freed the captured Tengu winged demihumans and crafted artificial wings for them. Their leader Ao joined the alliance, adding air defense to their growing forces. An undead dragon was terrorizing the Tengu mountains. Joshua crafted fire-resistant shields from moop wool and used ant leaves as weapons. Ira was launched into the sky by Awa and decapitated the dragon with one strike. Inside the remains, Joshua found a rare red mana stone. The Tengu officially joined the Fendel Alliance. Deep in the eastern mountains, Joshua discovered the legendary dwarves hidden under thick fur. Their leader Musp took a steel pick, and his ancestral mining instincts kicked in instantly. Joshua added the world's greatest miners and blacksmiths to his alliance. They found a rare purple or harder than anything Ira had ever struck. Joshua used it to craft armor and shields for the entire village defense force. He built iron lions, armored combat wagons pulled by 6 moops each, thick purple iron walls with archer slits, nearly unstoppable on flat ground. Roy had finally lost everything and was forced to march south to beg Joshua for help. But the Demon King's army was moving north, and the real war was about to begin. Joshua met the Schwartz Knights at the border with 400 Oni and 500 werewolves. When Roy's top knights challenged them, Ira took one's arm off before he felt the pain. Met shot an arrow through both hands of a fire mage before he could finish a spell. The combat wagons rolled forward and most of Roy's soldiers broke ranks and fled. Roy charged Joshua alone on horseback out of pure desperation. Joshua tripped the horse with a wooden spear and knocked Roy down with the blunt end. Roy grabbed a captive girl and held a sword to her throat, demanding surrender. Al flew down and disarmed him, while Whiz the slime tripped him. Ira and Met slashed his wrist so he could never hold a sword again. Roy crawled away into the mud, a broken man whose pride had finally cost him everything. Then a new threat appeared from the south. 5,000 orcs on armored boars, the main force of the Demon King's army. The mercenary leader Balan drew his blade and took the orc general's head in one motion. He had betrayed the Demon King the moment his daughter was safe. The Tengu dropped fire powder from the sky and the Moop wagon smashed through the orc lines. Total victory with 0 casualties for the Fendel Alliance. Joshua's community continued to grow at an incredible pace. He built hot springs, stone roads connecting all the territories, and a school for the children. The dwarves discovered a dungeon beneath the mines. Joshua cleared it with his team and found a blueprint for a flying ship. He built 50 purple iron golems as a permanent security force. A summoning stone called forth a massive shadow slime and eventually a demon lord named Ronia. Despite her terrifying power, Ronia showed no hostility and pledged to serve Joshua. Kappas, water-dwelling demihumans, joined the alliance after Joshua saved their leader Enna. He crafted a powerful water staff for Enna that shot water like a cannon. Turtlikin revealed ancient murals showing a lost demi-human civilization with airships. The blueprints Joshua found were part of their forgotten history. An envoy from the Demon King arrived demanding total surrender. Met smashed his bone throne, and Ira held a sword to his throat until he fled in terror. The mysterious black-armored knight Sophis stayed behind, polite and strangely familiar. Joshua and the dwarves built the first functional airship. Using wind magic and mechanical gears, the ship took flight and hovered with perfect stability. Fendel could now monitor the entire continent and travel vast distances in hours. Word came that the human emperor was calling for a holy war against all demi-humans. Joshua suspected mind control magic and flew to the capital to investigate. At Queen Iris's palace, they learned the emperor had been preparing this war for years. Joshua planned a massive feast to stall the war and gather intelligence. Then Sophis revealed the truth. The Demon King wanted to meet Joshua personally. At the Demon King's camp of 100,000 monsters, Joshua found a fake on the throne. Ira put her sword to its throat and the disguise collapsed. The monster leaders attacked, but Joshua and Ira defeated them all without drawing blood. A single bomb launched their airship into view above the camp. The entire army froze at the sight. Sophis stepped forward and removed the black helmet. The Demon King was a beautiful young woman with purple hair named Sophie. She possessed memories of a past life in another world, just like Joshua. Sophie wanted to open a gate to the world of the dead using mass sacrifice. Joshua flatly refused. He proposed using summoning stones instead, and Sophie agreed to try his way. They shook hands and formed an alliance between Fendel and the Demon King's territory. Joshua visited the Demon King's capital and was shocked to find a thriving civilization. Stone roads, markets, organized towns, nothing like the wasteland humans imagined. He even found his former knight comrade Villian living as a pet to a troll. The human emperor turned out to be a body double named Luther. The real emperor had died 50 years ago, sacrificing himself for peace. Luther agreed to stall the human army and provide summoning stones for the gate. Construction began immediately at the mountain palace Joshua had built. Every race contributed. Dwarves shattered stones and dug foundations, slimes gathered fragments. The fox spirit Cubi, who had been manipulating events from the shadows, finally attacked. He created an army of spirit undead to prevent any peace between humans and demons. Joshua's allies held the line while he and Ira tracked Cubi south. Cubi summoned a massive great spirit armored in blue flames wielding a devastating blade. Al redirected a river. Enna and the Kappa water mages unleashed a torrent. The flames were extinguished and the spirit's defenses collapsed. Berto shattered its chest with his broad axe, and Ira delivered the final strike. Cubi hit the ground, exhausted and defeated. Yamatsu, Cubi's old partner, tackled him, and Ecclesia bound him with roots. The alliance leaders stepped in and chose mercy over execution. Ira suggested showing Cubi the gate first. Melk said he should live to see that his dark plan was wrong. Seeing their mercy, Cubi broke down in tears for the first time. The gate was finished, a massive beautiful structure built through the teamwork of every race. When it activated, a glowing film appeared and everyone could speak to their lost loved ones. Joshua saw his fallen comrades but realized he didn't need to say anything. He was already happy with his life in Fendel. Ira told her parents' spirits she was finally at peace. Kyubi and Yamatsu found closure. Their lost families wouldn't have wanted revenge. The gate cracked and collapsed, but it didn't matter. Everyone had heard what they needed to hear. A month later, the war between humans and demons officially cooled down. Joshua declared Fendel a republic, where everyone would have a voice. The village threw a massive festival with fireworks created by the dwarves and demons. During the party, Ira and the others revealed the festival was actually a surprise wedding for Joshua and all of them. Joshua, realizing how much he loved every single one of them, finally stopped hesitating. He promised to stay with them forever. Fendel continued to grow, discovering new continents and becoming a symbol of peace. From a crafter kicked out of a night order to the leader of a nation. That's the distance Joshua traveled, and it started with a single step out the door. But to understand what makes this story hit different, you have to look at how it happened. Not through combat, not through revenge, not through some hidden bloodline or divine weapon. Through crafting. Through building things that people needed. Crossbows for hunters who had nothing to fight with. Armor that made an old man cry because it looked like his father's. A katana forged from a severed horn that turned a wounded girl into a warrior. Houses for refugees who had lost everything. Bridges over rivers nobody else could cross. Watchtowers that went up in 10 minutes. Artificial wings for creatures whose real ones were broken. A healing staff that fixed a horse's shattered leg in seconds. Every single thing Joshua built solved a problem that violence alone couldn't fix. And every problem he solved brought one more person, one more tribe, one more race, into an alliance that nobody thought was possible. Kijin and werewolves sharing a village. Ants and elves working the same fields. Dwarves and moops living on opposite sides of the same mountain. Minotaurs and foxkins sitting at the same table. A demon lord serving tea in a schoolhouse. None of it should work. All of it does, because Joshua built the foundations with his own hands. Roy spent 10 years taking credit for Joshua's work and throwing gold at parties. When the money ran out and the crafters quit, his empire collapsed in weeks. Joshua spent the same amount of time quietly making things that mattered. When he was thrown out, he built a nation from scratch in months. The difference between them was never about talent or strength. It was about what they valued. Roy valued glory, Joshua valued the work itself. And the work, it turns out, is what actually holds everything together. The crossbows that saved the village on its first night. The armor that made warriors out of starving farmers. The watchtower that spotted every threat before it arrived. The combat wagons that sent armies running without a single casualty. The airship that gave Fendel eyes across the entire continent. Every one of those things existed because Joshua sat down and built it. Not because someone ordered him to. Because someone needed it. That's the thread that runs through every chapter of this story. Need. Ira needed a weapon, and Joshua forged a katana from her own horn. Met needed armor, and Joshua recreated a 200-year-old legend in under a minute. Melk's werewolves needed shelter, and Joshua built 15 houses before dinner. The ants needed an alliance, and Joshua stopped their charge without hurting a single one. The Tengu needed wings, and Joshua crafted 30 pairs from monster feathers. The dwarves needed tools, and Joshua gave them steel picks that awakened ancestral instincts. The elves needed bows, and Joshua broke a centuries-old curse by simply making 50. The kappas needed protection, and Joshua built crossbows and a water staff. The foxkin needed safety, and Joshua gave them houses and a place at the school. The turtlican needed hope, and Joshua showed them their ancestors' airship was real. The demon king needed a way to reach the dead without sacrifice, and Joshua built a gate. Every time someone said it couldn't be done, Joshua pulled out his production magic and made it happen before they finished the sentence. That's not power in the traditional sense. It's not the kind that makes people kneel or armies flee. Although armies did flee, quite often, usually after seeing the combat wagons. It's the kind of power that makes people stay. Not because they're afraid of leaving, but because they don't want to. Because the village has hot springs now. Because the school teaches magic to every race equally. Because the bread from the windmill is better than anything in the capital. Because the armor fits perfectly, and the watchtower never sleeps. Because the man who built all of it never once asked for credit. Roy demanded credit for everything, and got nothing in return. Joshua demanded nothing, and got a nation. There's a lesson somewhere in there that Roy will probably never learn. But the people of Fendel learned it on the first day. When a stranger walked into their starving village, asked what they needed, and started building. He never stopped. From the first crossbow to the last airship, Joshua never stopped building. And the alliance that grew around him wasn't built on fear or obligation. It was built on the simple fact that Joshua solved problems. Every problem for every person, without asking what race they were or what they could offer. The Kijin warrior with the severed horn got the same care as the demon lord with infinite power. The baby moop got the same shelter as the Manat or chieftain. The foxkin children got the same school as the elven archers. Equal treatment, not because Joshua was some kind of saint, but because to a crafter, a problem is a problem regardless of who has it. You fix it, or you don't. Joshua always fixed it. That's why Ira followed him first. That's why Met declared herself his wife in front of the entire village. That's why Melk trusted a human after her people were hunted by them. That's why Ecclesia surrendered instead of fighting to the death. That's why Ira flew down from the mountains to join. That's why the dwarves offered their platinum ore. That's why the elves danced when they received bows. That's why the demon king removed her helmet and shook his hand. That's why the emperor agreed to stall a war. That's why QB, who wanted to destroy everything, wept when they showed him mercy. Because Joshua's answer to every problem, every enemy, every crisis was the same. Let me build something. A crossbow, a wall, a bridge, a house, a watchtower, a ship, a gate to the afterlife. Whatever the problem demanded, Joshua made it exist. And in doing so, he made something else exist too. A world where Kijin and werewolves and ants and elves and dwarves and foxkin, and moops and minotaurs and turtlikin and kappas and tangu and a demon lord all live in the same village, eat at the same table, and call each other neighbors. That world didn't exist before Joshua was thrown out of the Schwartz Knights. It exists now because he built it, one problem at a time. The captive hunters who terrorized the region are gone. The fire mudge who burned forest is ash. Roy is crawling in the mud with ruined wrist and a broken sword. The demon king's orc army was crushed in a single battle. The great spirit QB summon was drowned by a river rear-acted by a kappa girl. And the gate to the world of the dead opened just long enough for everyone to say goodbye. None of those victories were won by Joshua swinging a sword. They were won by the things he built before the fight even started. The crossbows that gave farmers the ability to fight back. The armor that turned villagers into warriors. The catapult that launched rocks from the watchtower he built in minutes. The combat wagons that made cavalry charges obsolete. The airship that gave them eyes in the sky. The bombs the dwarves invented in the workshops Joshua designed. The purple iron shields that blocked every arrow. The healing staff that kept fighters on their feet. The artificial wings that gave grounded creatures the ability to fly. Every single tool of victory was forged by the man Roy called a loser. The man who couldn't swing a sword built weapons that won wars. The man who couldn't fight created an alliance that defeated armies. The man who was thrown out for being useless became the most valuable person on the continent. And he did it all with production magic and the stubborn belief that building beats breaking. That's Joshua's real power. Not the magic itself, not the speed of his crafting, not the impossible things he creates. The belief that if you make something good enough, people will come. And they did. From every direction, every race, every corner of a continent torn apart by war. They came to Fendel because someone built them a home. Not a fortress, not a military base, not a strategic position. A home. With hot springs and a school and a windmill and bread that smells like hope. Roy built an empire on stolen glory, and it collapsed the moment Joshua left. Joshua built a village on craftsmanship, and it grew into a nation that changed the world. The irony is almost too perfect. The Night Order that threw away its crafter lost everything. The crafter they threw away built everything. And standing in the middle of it all, at the center of a republic made from scrap and stubborn, is a man with calloused hands and a small slime on his shoulder. Who never wanted to be a leader? Who never wanted to fight a war? Who never wanted anything except to make useful things for people who needed them? And got a family, a nation, and a legacy that will outlive every knight who ever mocked him. Because swords break, armor rusts, and glory fades. But the things Joshua built are still standing. The watchtower still watches. The walls still hold. The school still teaches. The windmill still turns. The airship still flies. And the village that started with a single crossbow and a desperate prayer for food now stretches from the mountains to the sea. The Kijin hunt with composite bows Joshua designed. The werewolves guard the roads in armor Joshua forged. The ants grow crops using techniques Joshua taught. The elves sing in a forest they reclaimed with boughs Joshua crafted. The dwarves mine ore in tunnels Joshua made safe. The Tengu fly patrol with wings Joshua built from monster feathers. The kappas fish with nets Joshua wove. The minotaurs live in stone houses Joshua raised in a single afternoon. The foxkin children study magic in a classroom Joshua created from nothing. The moops produce wool and milk in a longhouse Joshua designed to keep them comfortable. And the demon lord serves tea at the school. Content for the first time in centuries. All of it traces back to one moment. A crafter walking out of a night order with nothing but a satchel and a slime. Being called a loser by the man who couldn't survive a week without him. And choosing, instead of bitterness, instead of revenge, instead of proving anyone wrong, to just keep building. That's the story of Fendel. Not a war story. Not a revenge story. Not a power fantasy. A crafting story. About a man who made things. And the world that grew around him because of it. Joshua didn't conquer the continent. He furnished it. And somehow, that was enough to change everything. The hot springs steamed in the evening air as the village celebrated another peaceful day. Joshua sat on the edge, watching Ira and Met argue about whose turn it was to sit next to him. Melk was teaching the foxkin children to swim in the shallow end. Ecclesia had grown orange trees near the bathhouse using her root magic. Owl circled overhead on patrol, but even she kept glancing down at the party below. Whiz the slime bounced between groups, spreading a fresh citrus scent wherever he went. Joshua looked at it all and felt something he didn't have a word for. Not pride exactly, and not satisfaction. Something closer to the feeling you get when you finish building something and realize it's exactly what you imagined, but bigger. Bigger than one person could fill. Big enough for everyone. He thought about Roy, briefly. About the night order that used him for 10 years and discarded him in 10 seconds. About the word loser hanging in the air as he walked out the door. He didn't feel anger anymore. Just the faint echo of a door closing behind him and a road opening ahead. Everything that mattered happened after that door closed. The first crossbow, the first watchtower, the first time Met smiled at him covered in monster blood. The first time Iris swung the katana he forged from her own horn. The first time an entire village ate until they couldn't move. The first time a child from a hunted race walked into his school and sat down to learn. All of it started because a crafter decided that being called useless wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Fendel grew because Joshua built, and Joshua built because that's who he is. Not a warrior, not a king, not a chosen hero with a divine destiny. A crafter. The kind of person who looks at a pile of scrap and sees a watchtower. Who looks at a broken wing and sees an artificial replacement. Who looks at a severed horn and sees a katana that channels fire. Who looks at a starving village and sees a nation. Roy looked at Joshua and saw a loser. Joshua looked at the world and saw things worth building. One of them is sitting in mud with ruined wrists. The other is sitting in hot springs surrounded by people who chose to follow him. Not because he was strong, because he was useful. And in a world of swords and spells and monsters and wars, being useful turned out to be the most powerful thing of all. The dwarves were building something new in the mines, a railway system with iron-lined grooves. Carriages could travel at high speed without shaking, connecting every settlement in the alliance. The elves had expanded their fortress on the river island with a stone pier for trade boats. The Tengu were farming the mountain terraces with crops the ants had helped them plant. The Kappas had turned White Sand Island into a thriving seafood trading post. The Foxkin children were top students at the school, natural magic users every one of them. And the Minotaurs, once enemies controlled by dark magic, were the strongest builders in Fendel. Every piece of this puzzle was something Joshua had placed. Not with force, but with patience, craft, and the willingness to help anyone who asked. The gate to the afterlife had crumbled, but nobody minded. They had heard what they needed to hear from the people they'd lost. And they had found something in the living world that was worth more than any ghost. A community that didn't care what species you were, as long as you were willing to contribute. Joshua finished his soak and climbed out of the hot springs. Ira was waiting with a towel she'd woven from moop wool, impossibly soft. Met was grilling monster meat on a stone fire pit Joshua had built the week before. Melk was drying off the foxkin kids who'd stayed in the water too long. Ecclesia had arranged fresh oranges in a neat line, because ants are organized like that. Al landed gracefully on the bathhouse roof and reported all clear from the sky. And was bounced onto Joshua's shoulder and released a little puff of citrus. Joshua looked at the village stretching out around him. Stone houses climbing the hillside. A watchtower catching the last light of the setting sun. The windmill turning slowly against the evening sky. The airship docked at the clifftop, sails folded, waiting for the next journey. Smoke rising from 100 chimneys as families prepared dinner. The sound of children laughing in 3 different languages. And the smell of fresh bread drifting from the oven he'd built with his own hands. 10 years ago, he was a nameless crafter in a forge. 1 year ago, he was a loser thrown out with nothing. Today, he was standing in the middle of a republic he built from scratch, surrounded by people who loved him, married to warriors who could level mountains, allied with a demon king and a human emperor, with a slime on his shoulder and calloused hands that had shaped a continent. Joshua picked up a piece of scrap iron from the ground out of habit. turned it over in his fingers, already imagining what it could become. A hinge for a new gate, maybe. Or a fitting for the next ship. Or a toy for the fox-skin children. It didn't matter what it became. What mattered was that he'd make it useful. Because that's what Joshua does. He takes the things the world throws away and turns them into something that matters. Scrap metal into watchtowers. Severed horns into legendary swords. Broken wings into flight. Starving villages into thriving nations. And a loser crafter into the most important person on the continent. Not through power. Through craft. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the village lights flickered on one by one. Enchanted lanterns Joshua had designed to light automatically at dusk. A small touch, barely worth mentioning compared to the airship or the gate. But it meant that every path in Fendel was lit at night. Every child could walk home safely. Every patrol could see what was coming. Small things, built with care, that made the whole system work. That was always Joshua's real genius. Not the spectacular inventions, though those were impressive. The small, quiet things that nobody notices until they're gone. The lock on every door, the glass in every window, the oven in every kitchen, the bridge over every river, the road between every settlement, the spear in every guard's hand, the bow on every hunter's back. Thousands of small, useful things that together formed something unbreakable. A civilization, built by one man's hands, and maintained by every hand that joined his. The night settled over Fendel warm and quiet. Joshua walked through the village center, was bouncing on his shoulder. He passed the school where tomorrow's lessons were already written on the board. He passed the forge where the dwarves had left new purple iron ingots cooling. He passed the medical tent where Melk was reviewing healing notes for her students. He passed the watchtower where a Kijin guard waved down at him with a crossbow slung over her back. He passed the moot pen where Siri was already asleep, transformed back into sheep form. He reached his own house, the one the girls had insisted he build larger after the wedding. He opened the door and heard arguing. Ira and met over whose cooking was better tonight. Melk telling Awit that the foxskin kids needed new winter clothes. Ecclesia organizing the pantry by season and nutritional value. The demon Lord Ronia quietly reading a book in the corner. Was hopped off his shoulder and bounced toward the kitchen where crumbs were waiting. Joshua stood in the doorway of the home he'd built with his own magic, filled with the people who'd followed him across a continent. And he smiled. Not the smile of a conqueror. Not the smile of a man who proved everyone wrong. The smile of a crafter looking at something he built and knowing it was good. That it worked. That it would last. Roy called him a loser and threw him out. The captive hunters called the demi-humans animals and tried to sell them. The Demon King's army called the Alliance weaklings and sent 5,000 orcs. The Fox Spirit called peace impossible and summoned an army of the dead. The Human Emperor called for holy war and mobilized a nation. And Joshua, the crafter who couldn't swing a sword, built a crossbow, then a watchtower, then a wall, then a fleet, then a nation, then a gate, and answered every single one of them with something they never expected. Not destruction. Creation. The village of Fendel went to sleep that night the way it always did, with guards on the watchtower, lanterns on the pots, and bread rising in the oven, with the crafter's hands resting on a pillow, dreaming about what to build tomorrow. Maybe a new boat for the campus, maybe a telescope for the Tengu Observatory, maybe better desks for the school, maybe nothing important at all, just a small tool that makes someone's day easier. That would be enough. It was always enough, because Joshua never needed to build something world-changing to feel satisfied. He just needed to build something useful, and the world changed around him anyway. Not because he planned it, because that's what happens when you keep building. One crossbow becomes an arsenal. One watchtower becomes a fortress. One village becomes a nation. One crafter becomes a legend. And one slime named Whiz becomes the most well-traveled blob of goo in recorded history. The stars came out over Fendel. The same stars that had watched Joshua get fired, get mocked, get called a loser. The same stars that watched him forge a katana from a severed horn by lantern light. That watched him build a watchtower in 10 minutes while a village held its breath. That watched 11 tribes sit at the same table for the first time in 1,000 years. Those stars were still watching now. And what they saw was a man who took the word useless and turned it into a nation. One forge, one hammer, one enchantment at a time. Joshua rolled over in bed and closed his eyes. Ira's breath was warm against his shoulder. Met's hand was on his arm. Melk was curled at the foot of the bed in wolf form, ears twitching in a dream. Somewhere outside, a guard whistled a tune Joshua didn't recognize. Somewhere further out, the windmill creaked in a gentle breeze. Somewhere beyond the walls, the airship waited for morning. And somewhere deep in Joshua's mind, already half asleep, an idea was forming. A new kind of tool, maybe. Or a better way to insulate the mountain cabins. or a recipe for the vanilla ice cream the kids kept asking for. It didn't matter yet. It would matter tomorrow when his hands would shape it into something real. That's the promise Joshua made to himself the day he walked out of the Schwartz Knights. Not to get revenge, not to become powerful, not to prove anyone wrong. Just to keep building. No matter what. No matter who called him useless. No matter how many armies showed up at the gate. No matter how impossible the problem seemed. He would look at it, pick up his tools, and start working. And he would not stop until it was done. That promise is why Fendel exists. That promise is why 11 races share one home. That promise is why a gate to the afterlife open and close with grace. That promise is why the word loser means something different now. In the Schwartz Knights, it meant failure, weakness, someone to discard. In Fendel, it means the man who built this world, and will keep building it until there's nothing left that needs fixing. Which, knowing Joshua, will be never. Because there's always something to build. Always another bridge, another house, another wall, another tool. Another person who needs help. Another problem that violence can't solve but a well-made crossbow can. Another race that's been told they're worthless and just needs someone to prove otherwise. Joshua will be there. With his magic, his callous hands, and his slime. Building. Always building. Roy threw away his crafter and lost his entire kingdom. Joshua was thrown away and built a new one. There's a reason one of them is sitting in hot springs surrounded by love, and the other is sitting in mud with broken wrist. The reason isn't power. It isn't luck. It isn't destiny. It's craft. The simple, stubborn, world-changing act of making something useful with your own hands. And never, ever, stopping. The morning light hit the watchtower first, as it always did. Then the windmill, then the school, then the houses climbing the hillside, then the forge, then the bathhouse, then the docks. By the time the light reached Joshua's window, the village was already awake. The dwarves were at the mines. The ants were in the fields. The Kijin were on patrol. The Tengu were in the sky. The Kappas were casting nets. The elves were tending the forest. The moops were grazing. The minotaurs were hauling stone. The foxkin children were walking to school, chattering in a mix of 3 languages. And Joshua was in the forge, hammering something new into shape. Same as yesterday. Same as tomorrow. Same as every day since a night order called him useless and set him free. Was bounced on the anvil, spreading citrus scent through the workshop. Joshua smiled and kept working. Because that's the thing about crafters. They don't need glory. They don't need titles. They don't need someone to tell them they matter. They just need something to build. And Joshua always had something to build. A better plow for the ants, a sharper blade for Met, a lighter shield for the Tengu. A warmer coat for Melk, a sturdier boat for the Kappas, a softer bed for Ira. A toy for the foxkin children, a mirror for Awa, a new forge hammer for himself. Small things, big things, impossible things. All of them useful. All of them made with care. All of them part of the village that a loser crafter built from nothing. Fendel. The village that shouldn't exist. Built by the man they said couldn't build anything. Roy's name faded from history like smoke from a dead forge. Joshua's name was carved into the foundation stone of every building in Fendel. Not because he asked for it. Because the people who lived in those buildings insisted. They wanted every child born in Fendel to know who built the walls that kept them safe. Who forged the weapons that defended them. Who crafted the tools that fed them. Who built the school that taught them. And who proved, by simply never stopping, that being useful is the greatest power of all. Joshua set the finished piece on the cooling rack and wiped his hands. Outside, the village hummed with life. Inside, the forge was warm and the anvil was ready for the next project. He picked up his hammer, was bounced once, and the crafter who was called a loser started building again. The same way he always did. Quietly, steadily, without asking for permission or praise. Just a man, a hammer, a slime, and the absolute certainty that the next thing he builds will be exactly what someone needs. It always is. 10 years as a nameless crafter. 1 year as a free man. And a lifetime of building still ahead. Roy called him a loser. The world called him a legend. Joshua called himself a crafter. And that was always more than enough.